Hey, Blake T. Wild here, and welcome back to the Ultimate Era, where I am covering comics from the original Ultimate Marvel Universe. The good and the bad. And there's been so much bad. Our journey today takes us to a proto-AVX. Remember AVX, that great event, AVX, which led into where the Red Skull stole Professor X's brain from his corpse and put it on top of his own brain so that he had two brains in one skull, like a peanut M&M with two peanuts. Released in 2002, written by Mark Millar with art by Chris Bacalo, this is Ultimate War. So real quick, this storyline takes place before Ultimate X-Men Volume 6, Return of the King, in which we follow what happened immediately before this in Ultimate X-Men Volume 4, when the Beast of the X-Men was catfished by the Blob into revealing to the Brotherhood of Mutants that the X-Men did not kill Magneto that fateful day back in Volume 1. Instead, Charles Xavier brainwashed him and placed him into like a new life in Brooklyn. Maybe I'll get around to Volume 6 someday. But I think that this volume does a concise enough lead up into where the universe goes that Volume 6 is kind of unnecessary. Like, they did this event crossover, and then they did it again, kind of, with just focusing on Magneto. Anyway, the story begins on the Brooklyn Bridge. There's been an 18-wheeler whose load of logs has toppled onto all the lanes, causing a major traffic jam and making the police have to back people up off of the bridge, which is going to take hours to clear. People just kind of amble around, waiting to be able to move out of there. Then a massive explosion erupts, and the fiery blast tears across the whole bridge, ripping brick from its levels and sundering the waters below. And in Times Square, Magneto's image is televised along with a message that evolution has caused this to happen. He states that humanity has only 6 months to surrender the world to Homo sapien superior. And later at the White House, Nick Fury meets with Dick Cheney regarding the situation and notes that as far as S.H.I.E.L.D. is concerned, Magneto was executed 6 months ago, which means that everything that's happened at this point in the Ultimate X-Men happened in the past 6 months. Now, I suppose that makes sense, but you know me. I'm obsessed with this stuff and making everything fit together in a nice little box. So, I think that the lead up to the first volume of Ultimate X-Men probably happens over the course of a couple months. You know, when we're meeting the characters and Xavier's like kind of recruiting people. Then it leads into, you know, Wolverine showing up. He's there for a little bit. They learn to trust him, blah, blah, blah. Then they learn he was sent there to kill Xavier. Whatever happened in that one, I barely remember. Then Magneto attacks Washington, D.C. That happens. We get Volume 2 sometime after that, maybe like a couple months later, or a couple weeks later even. I think maybe like a month or two might make more sense, because it takes a while to plan a world tour. And that's at a time when the X-Men, after they save Washington, D.C., after they save the President of the United States and destroy Magneto, quote-unquote, they're worldwide sensations, and that leads into their aforementioned world tour, which concludes shortly before Volume 3, Hellfire and Brimstone. Maybe I'll give it another month or so. And, you know, Iceman gets fucked up, his family sues Xavier. That's a long, extensive thing that's happening, and by the time we see Iceman back in that volume, which I didn't actually show you guys, he looks pretty fine. He's kind of back to normal for the most part. So there must have been some, like a couple months in between volumes, at least, from those two. This is all to say that I think it works out well that this is happening within 6 months, while, say, everything in Ultimate Spider-Man up to Harry Osborn turning into a goblin doesn't. Anyway, back to the thing you came here for. Nick Fury explains to Cheney that Xavier reported to them directly that Magneto was dead, and that was the information S.H.I.E.L.D. was working off of, and subsequently the information the U.S. worked off of. But he assures the VP that he has the Ultimates working on it right now. And meanwhile, on the banks of the East River, Thor and Iron Man work to remove the wreckage. Back over at the Triskelion, the Wasp hangs out in the Situation Room, watching the news footage and working with S.H.I.E.L.D. to conduct a manhunt for the Brotherhood of Mutants. And we also hear from her that Captain America took Black Widow and Hawkeye to follow up on some leads. Elsewhere, In a hotel room, the Brotherhood of Mutants sit around and watch the news reports. Rogue panics when she hears from an anchor that the Ultimates have been called in to engage in searching for the mutants responsible for the attack, but Toad tells her to calm down, because the news always says stuff like that to keep people calm and make them feel better. Mastermind agrees and rhetorically asks how they could possibly track them down when they had the Vanisher and Hard Drive teleport them out of New York City. He tells everybody to stay calm and just wait until those two are able to fully teleport them further away. Then a gas bomb smashes through one of the windows and detonates, and Captain America smashes through the rest of the window and fucking demolishes them. Cap radios into Black Widow that Vanisher teleported away, and she reports that she got him. Meanwhile, Rogue and Toad explode out of... I just realized that rhymed. Meanwhile, Rogue and Toad explode out of the second-story balcony and land in the snow, outside where Hawkeye orders them to stand down and surrender. So this would mean that because it is presumably New York, or maybe New Jersey, based on the implications from their conversation that while Vanisher and Hard Drive did teleport them away, they didn't go far. They didn't get, like, several states over or something like that, or they're not in, like, a different country. So that would mean that this is happening sometime probably December to February, pushing it with a March, I think, since it's snowing in kind of the New York, New Jersey area. And I think the fact that this book was released in December, we can say that it's happening in December, the events of this issue. The Ultimate X-Men Volume 1 must have then happened earlier into the year. Magneto would then attack the White House in June, and everything since then has occurred within that intervening 6 months. Later that night at the Triskelion, Quicksilver and Scarlet Witch are brought inside and come across the Ultimates. Everyone quiets down and turns to look at the twins, and Captain America invites them to take a seat. Black Widow's a bit apprehensive about working with the two former leaders of the Brotherhood. Cap vouches for them and says that they have been providing information to S.H.I.E.L.D. Cap then begins to explain that their primary goal is capturing or killing Magneto. Cap continues and notes that S.H.I.E.L.D. has been unable to contact Xavier, and that Iron Man is currently leading a team there to investigate. Cut to Iron Man and the S.H.I.E.L.D. agents heading inside of Xavier's school. Tony is fascinated by the camouflage technology that hides the building, and Tony notes that the school appears to be totally empty, and in his opinion, it seems like it was abandoned in a rush. So Iron Man heads inside and discovers the place totally emptied, with leftover documents and equipments that they couldn't escape with scattered around. And Tony tells Cap that he thinks it looks like the X-Men jumped ship over to Magneto's side. 2 days later, at Pier 88 in NYC, aka one of the safe houses of the X-Men. That was a lot of letters strung together. I guess that's any sentence. Xavier speaks to his ex-wife, Moira McTaggart, over a secure line, and he asks her how their evacuation is going. She notes that it's not great because they lost all of their equipment from Muir Island, but she's hoping that this'll all just be temporary. Xavier agrees, hoping that they can bring Magneto to justice and get this all over with. And then he notes that they still haven't heard from Cyclops, Kitty, or Wolverine. Storm and Colossus then return with some food and other travel-sized supplies. And why is Colossus in his metal form? They're supposed to be incognito. I hope he wasn't walking around like that. And also, why would he turn into that when he gets here, into the safe house? It's supposed to be a safe house. Beast gets angry that Aurora forgot to buy some things that he needed to create an untraceable line to contact S.H.I.E.L.D. and the Ultimates, but Jean tells him to calm his furry ass down and take a break. And Storm snaps back that none of this would have happened if he didn't cause it all. Because Beast, yes, is directly responsible for the 800 people who died on the Brooklyn Bridge. And anyone else who dies from the hands of Magneto. Ultimate Beast is the real reason that Ultimatum happens. And it was because he was horny. Beast walks away and disgruntledly informs the others that the away team is arriving back with the Blackbird, and the cloaked aircraft lands inside the safe house, and Jean realizes that Scott's mental presence isn't there. Wolverine apologizes. This feels suspicious. And notes that he and Kitty got separated from Scott in the Savage Land after the cavern system they were in collapsed, while Scott was still inside, after they fought a massive supercomputer and its army of zombies. That part is true. So Kitty and Wolverine had to travel all the way around the island for 3 days just to get back to the X-Jet. And Peter turns to Kitty and quietly asks if Scott is really dead, and Kitty turns to him, and for some reason they colored her hair blonde, and quietly nods and Cap says, yeah, he is. That night across the town at the Triskelion, which really isn't that far, all things considered, Captain America overlooks Wolverine's file. And this is also the first time in the Ultimate Universe that we learn that Wolverine's real name here is also James Howlett. Cap also recognizes him from some operations he went on with the Canadian Special Forces back in World War II. Tony cracks a joke that he must have some really good moisturizer to look as good as he does before his alcoholism gets the better of him and he begins to get up for a drink, asking everyone else what they want. Then in a flash, Quicksilver delivers everyone their requested drinks. Cap sits down with his Coca-Cola, and Tony gets an update on his mutant location system that his company is working on in secret, which is like an update to the Cerebro system that they took from Xavier. And I think there's like some story where the Fantastic Four get their hands on the Cerebro system and it causes a clash between the Fantastic Four and the X-Men. It is Cerebro, but on a massive global scale using a worldwide network of satellites. And he notes that by the end of the month, they will be able to trace every single person who is X Factor positive. Cap notes that he hopes to have this solved before the end of the month and into the new year, and then asks the twins if they have any suggestions regarding the Brotherhood's safe houses. But Quicksilver tells them that all the ones that they knew about have been abandoned and destroyed. Thor then takes a moment to tell the two how admirable they are for taking accountability for their father and working with the Ultimates instead of siding with the Brotherhood. And Quicksilver notes that their father is a psychotic lunatic megalomaniac, and it wasn't a difficult decision. Especially now that they've gotten a taste of freedom away from him. Then the power goes out, and the backup generators engage the emergency power supply. Cap orders everyone to ready themselves when the walls of the Triskelion ache and wrench apart, and the rattling sounds of gunfire ring through the halls as Magneto kills the soldiers with their own bullets and marches past them. Cap orders Thor to take up behind him, along with Quicksilver and Wanda, and that they need to ensure that Magneto stays away from Tony and the other civilians they have in the Situation Room. Then Magneto rips the doors apart and unleashes a torrent of torn metal against the Ultimates as they all take cover. Cap launches his shield, Magneto returns it directly into him, slamming him into a wall. Thor launches Stormbreaker, and Magneto manages to halt it just seconds away from his own head, and then rockets it through the wall as he taunts the pathetic humans before him. Cap is held against the wall by his own shield and orders Wanda and Pietro to act, but they stand silently as their father orders them to come and accept their punishment. Do you know why I am so angry with you? Because I sided with the X-Men. Because I stole your helmet in Washington. Because I let your mind be taken over. No. I thought that actually showed some admirable ambition, Pietro. And for the first time in your life, you were showing some degree of strength. But I was wrong. I'm angry because you, son, took something great and you neutered it. And your punishment, Wanda, is quite straightforward. You get to watch. The power returns, and Magneto notes that all of the information that S.H.I.E.L.D. had on the Brotherhood and its members has been carefully deleted and totally wiped from all of their systems. But he notes that they will keep the Triskelion around to use after the fall of man. Then he explodes out of the roof and flies away. His magnetic influence disappears, and Cap races to the hole as Tony reports that they got a message through to Xavier and that he wants to broker a deal to help. But Cap tells him that he couldn't care less. And at this point, Xavier is in this just as deep as Magneto, and the Ultimates are gonna bring him down just as hard. A few days later, in a secret fake town dubbed Lincoln, President Bush meets with Nick Fury. And this place, it kind of reminds me of Pleasant Hill from later in the mainstream Marvel comics, mainly because it's the facade of a small American town that's, in reality, totally controlled in every way possible by S.H.I.E.L.D. We learned from Fury that this place was founded as like a safe haven for every president in danger since John Wilkes Booth assassinated President Lincoln. And it has the most up-to-date security security technology. I guess it's better for the president's morale to not be in a bunker somewhere and instead actually feel like he can, like, walk around or something. Interesting idea. Fury guarantees the president's safety from Magneto and then notes that S.H.I.E.L.D. was able to keep Magneto's attack on the Triskelion under wraps, but the American public is getting antsy and paranoid. And Fury tells him that the president shouldn't feel a twinge of sympathy for the lowlives that are the X-Men. As he climbs into his car, he tells the president that he holds Xavier and the rest of his student ilk responsible for every person that is executed in Magneto's anti-human crusade. Bush tells Fury that the X-Men saved his daughter and asks Fury to promise him that they bring Xavier in alive. Fury says that he can't keep that promise and he drives away. Later at the Triskelion, Cap and Janet discover that Banner turned into the Hulk and escaped during Magneto's attack, and he ate 6 people before the knockout gas got him. Steve walks over to her and tells her that her DNA stuff doesn't matter to him or anyone else on the team. And Janet acts like she doesn't know what he's talking about. And then Steve leans in and whispers that he knows that she's a mutant. And that Fury also knows that she's a mutant ever since she joined S.H.I.E.L.D. But Cap assures her that this is a war on terror, not a war on mutants. Somewhere in America, Bobby Drake and his parents hide out in an old friend of his father's place because they are on the run following the crackdown by the government on the X-Men and the mutants. Also, remember earlier when I brought up how Bobby Drake's family tried to sue Charles Xavier? That was a thing that happened for a while. They worked with, like, some anti-mutant senator who wanted to take the school down and, like, pass laws to ban mutants even further than they already are, and he paid for Bobby's medical bills and all of that. But when the time came, Bobby refused to sue. He refused to make any statements against Xavier. He flipped the switch and threw everything on the head of the senator and ruined his plans. So now, that's all to say, the family are even more broke than they would have been. Bobby's dad pleads with his son to let go of the idea of superheroics because their lives are totally ruined. And Bobby tells him that he talks about the X-Men like they're the Brotherhood. And Bobby's dad notes that as far as he's concerned, the only difference between Magneto and Charles Xavier is about 300 pounds of hair. That night at Pier 88, Jean learns from Charles that they're going to stop hunting the Brotherhood. Xavier continues that the most effective course that they can take now is compromising and speaking with them. Jean tells him that she doesn't really like this idea and would rather stick to the original plan, but Xavier asks if he's ever given her a reason to doubt his judgment. Then Wolverine walks up and tells him that he finished working on the car and he's about to head out for some supplies. And as he leaves, Charles brings up to Jean Wolverine's sudden opening of feelings after so much violence and betrayal. She notes that ever since the Phoenix happened, she's been getting flashes into Wolverine's mind. And Jean says that she knows it sounds crazy, but that's what happens. She also doesn't think that Scott's death was an accident. She thinks Wolverine let him die. The next day, Xavier and the X-Men meet with a mutant psychic associate of Magneto's at the Metropolitan Museum of Art. Magneto speaks through the mutant as Charles tells him that he's not his enemy, nor is he trying to trap his old friend. Xavier just wants to make a peace offering and then proposes a deal. He and the X-Men will join forces with Magneto once and for all, and they'll be back together again like best friends. If they move forward with the Brotherhood of Mutants crusade for mutant rights peacefully. Magneto asks Charles if he truly thinks that peace will get them anywhere. Magneto says he's surprised and that he'll need some time to think this over, and Charles gives him 48 hours. And Magneto tells him he'll be in touch. And outside, Wolverine sits on his motorcycle and watches the 2 Brotherhood members leave and then drive away, and then he heads off after him. And meanwhile, at his secret headquarters, Magneto speaks to Eunice about the proposal. He laughs off the idea and explains that it's obviously a trap, but he explains that this has been pretty helpful because it's told him that Charles is 10 steps behind him. And then he wonders when the Ultimates will be arriving at Charles's safe house. And several miles in the sky, Iron Man overlooks the Lower East Side, noting that the tip they got seems to be true. And Christ, those clouds are moving quick. Fury runs the operation from the Triskelion as ground troops move in. Neural scramblers are activated with a 25-minute window, and the Iron Man soars down and performs a bombing run. Captain America and the rest of the Ultimates quickly move in. Across the city, Wolverine is assaulted by the sudden appearance of S.H.I.E.L.D. helicopters. He heads into a car park, up the floors until he rockets himself out and onto one of the choppers. Fury radios into Iron Man that they just lost contact with all 4 units deployed on Wolverine, and orders Tony to divert his attention to that hairy freak. Meanwhile, the X-Men work on escaping the burning ruin of their safe house. Wasp and her team are subdued due to Storm as she unleashes her powers on the Lower East Side. Then Thor arrives and slams his massive hammer through the roof of the safe house, collapsing it even further beneath her. In the sewers, Beast acrobatically escapes Hawkeye's team, and Black Widow and her men wait at one of the culverts leading into the East River when a light shines towards them. She orders her squad to get ready for Beast and the Professor when one of them announces that something is moving at speeds 75 miles and picking up. Black Widow screams for everyone to hit the deck as the X-Jet rockets out and into the sky. Beast celebrates their escape, and then Charles Xavier notices that Black Widow had latched onto the jet and planted small explosives. The plane explodes as Iron Man returns, unable to locate Wolverine anywhere on any of his radars, something he's just able to do because of Weapon X. And he finds Beast and Charles ejecting with their parachutes. He soars through the air, grabs their cables, and begins hauling them closer into the Neural Scrambler's area of effect, when Wolverine leaps off of a nearby roof and slashes his claws through Iron Man's armor. Tony drops the X-Men on a roof as Wolverine tears into his suit, and they plummet to the ground. Nearby, Jean and Kitty have been cornered by 2 S.H.I.E.L.D. soldiers. Then Wolverine crash lands into him and fucking brutalizes the guys. He stands up and finds Captain America waiting for him. Cap asks Jim if he remembers their meetings, the 1942 airdrops, when they fought together in Africa in 44 and landed on Normandy in 45. And Wolverine asks who the hell Jim is. Cap gives him a rundown of a life Wolverine doesn't remember as they circle one another and S.H.I.E.L.D. troops surround them. Wolverine asks what the hell he's talking about, and Cap reveals that it was just a distraction for tactical advantage, and then opens fire on him along with the S.H.I.E.L.D. soldiers. Meanwhile, Colossus and Thor duke it out when Hawkeye launches a miniature localized nuke arrow? Surely that can't be safe. Elsewhere, a team find their way to Xavier and Beast's location, and Fury orders them to drop them both and secure Xavier. Then Iceman arrives and freezes the entire Lower East Side in a deluge of ice and frost. Bobby calls out for the Professor, and because his ice-truction ruined S.H.I.E.L.D.'s neural scramblers, Xavier and Jean can once again use their telepathy. The X-Men then all look around in shock as Xavier reveals that he has paralyzed every non-mutant mind within a 10-block radius, keeping them in perfect stasis. But he tells the kids that they have to move quickly and demands that they leave him behind and ensure their own safety. However, the Wasp is still up and active, and Fury gives her Xavier's location. A few minutes later, she flies in, zaps Xavier with her electrical wasp stings, and makes him fall unconscious. Cap then radios in to Fury that they somehow lost 8 minutes of time, and all the X-Men are gone. And that night at the Triskelion, Cap and Fury discuss Tony's condition, Steve noting that he's perfectly happy with the cute nurses giving him all that attention. Then Fury notes that with Xavier in their custody, it's only a matter of time before his little cult comes crashing down, and that in a couple weeks' time, every one of them will be locked away in Camp X Factor down in Cuba. But, unbeknownst to Fury, Magneto has had his Brotherhood interfere with the Triskelion systems, and he's currently speaking to Xavier in his cell. Magneto informs Charles that he has a final offer to give him. He'll remove Charles' psychic blocks, then he'll tear this place apart, and they can leave to fight for mutants like they once did. But Xavier tells him he's not interested. Magneto ponders how fractured his team must be right now, huddled together with no leader, hunted by humanity, and questions how long it'll take before they come looking for a new leader. And just before he leaves, Magneto tells Xavier that a new era is beginning, not just for mutants, but for the X-Men, and Xavier will play no part in it. The end. Hope you enjoyed. Let me know what you thought in the comments below. I really liked it. I thought this was way better than the past few Ultimate X-Men story arcs, and most of the Ultimate stories from around this time. What the hell happened? This was like a classic Mark Miller, non-stop, riveting, edge-of-your-seat story, action, intrigue, unique characters with drastically different mindsets, all converging on one another, and there's some pretty good emotion that goes into the story as well, not to mention the fantastic art by Chris Bacalo and coloring by Paul Mounts to really bring this all to life. What are your thoughts on the almost, like, Darth Vader visual portrayal of Magneto in this? I like the look and the overall hatred that he exudes. It really feels like what Xavier did to him and the subsequent escape from it just really ruined his already psychotic mental state. And now his pure, unbridled hate is just all that fills him. And the visual design just completely promotes that. But me, of course, you know, I'm a fucking nerd, so I gotta figure out how this works in the timeline. It's a confusing piece to place in my headcanon of the Ultimate Marvel chronology. I'm thinking that it happens sometime after the Ultimates, obviously, and Ultimate Spider-Man vs. Doc Ock, but before Ultimate Spider-Man vs. Venom, which, as I've said before, is around the end of Peter's freshman year, his first sort of year being in Spider-Man almost. And because of how just rampant and quick these X-Men stories go, Xavier is, spoiler alert, he gets freed in the next story arc of the Ultimate X-Men because they help him with Magneto or whatever. So that means it probably takes place over the course of another month maybe, or about, and their names are all cleared by S.H.I.E.L.D. and the U.S. government, blah, blah, blah. Status quo is returned, is what I'm saying. Meaning that Xavier and the X-Men's appearances in Ultimate Spider-Man vs. Black Cat, when Geldof shows up, my favorite character, Geldof, that adds up and lines into sort of my idea of where the timeline is. And it also adds to Wolverine not being around, because in the next story he leaves for a little bit, goes up to Canada until Scott eventually comes and finds him and like brings him back at a later date. Although Rogue and Nightcrawler do join in the next part, the argument can be made that they just weren't around when Spider-Man was there. But let's discuss this as an Avengers vs. X-Men story. And for what it is, you know, an Ultimate Universe comic, and for how early it takes place in the Ultimate Universe, it's really good. It almost reminds me of Captain America Civil War, just due to the general lower scope of the battles between these two smaller groups. But I really do think it worked very well. I was pleasantly surprised by this. I'm still pleasantly surprised when I go back to it. It's kind of, I like it better than the actual AVX Avengers vs. X-Men comic event several years later, because I can barely remember what happened in that one, but I remember not being a fan of it. Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. Did you enjoy this? Do you think it works well as an Avengers vs. X-Men comic, at least in the Ultimate Universe? Because this sort of like the hatred between the Ultimates and the X-Men, it continues. It doesn't go away. This is like the status quo for these two groups for quite some time. Let me know what your thoughts are down below, of course. And as always, check out my Patreon, patreon.com/Smokey'sVideos for early access to videos, movie commentaries, or my comics, which are posted on there, Custodians and Destructo Boy. Check out my Etsy shop where you can pick up the physical copies of the Destructo Boy and the Custodians comics. Every purchase comes with a free head sketch of any character of your choosing. I also have two podcasts, the Comic Shtick Podcast, where podcasts are my shtick, and I Need Some Disney, where I sit down with my Disney-obsessed wife, and we discuss everything from the parks to the rides to the characters to the movies and shows, everything in between. I will see you guys next time. Bye.